go. Hey, there we are. Okay, we already started talking, and we're talking about dreams. So let's get back into that before we lose the thread. So yeah, how do you do that now? Now we've done the
Not too
intro.
difficult. Not
Go
too
on,
difficult.
you take it on.
All right. So I've been fascinated with dreaming my entire life. I never accepted the simple stories about them when I was a child. I would have a complex dream experience. My parents would say, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a dream." And the idea of something being just a dream didn't fly with me. Um, Certainly, there are many different modes and forms of dreaming, and different people. Each of us is unique in our dreaming experience, even though a lot of that experience is similar to what other humans experience. Um, and having experienced significant disruption to my rhythms, I began to learn some astonishing things. And there's all kinds of fascinating content here. But one of the things I was beginning to speak about a moment ago is that we don't just have a circadian rhythm. The body has many different rhythms, and when they're harmonized, when those rhythms synchronize well, then we sleep at night, and we dream well in the night, and we wake in the morning. And for the dreaming mind, as I was saying earlier, waking is, for most of us anyway, an apocalypse for the dreaming mind. It is the end of the world. Right? And I think the dreaming mind, and I'm speaking of it as if it's a distinct mind, whether or not it completely is a more complex question. But certainly what happens metabolically in the brain upon waking radically limits right hemispheric excuse me. There's a good little physical interruption there.
Yeah.
It radically limits the sort of freedom of the right hemisphere metabolically. And so most of us don't experience what we did experience in childhood, which was dreaming while awake. The dreaming mind was awake when we were very small, when we were awake. And over time, what happens, it seems, or at least one way of thinking about it, is that representational consciousness, as it develops and as the brain is beginning to structure representational consciousness, it more and more evicts the dreaming mind from our waking world until pretty much it only exists at night, right? And we can think of this, there's lots of fascinating material here, but in the Bible, where Cain kills Abel in Genesis, right? This is the eviction of the dreaming mind to the underworld and the world of death, right? Abel, literally, his name is Hevel. It means puff of vapor. It means like changing, ambiguous, amorphous form, right? So, we're told that we grow out of childhood, but I think what actually happens is that the dreaming mind gets evicted primarily by the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation that take place during our waking experience over the span of our childhood, with probably the primary phase of that change beginning to become serious between 5 and 9 in most children, though each child's timeline is unique. So what I was talking about earlier was just that we don't just have a circadian rhythm, there's a number of different rhythms, and when they synchronize, everything's good. When they desynchronize, then we have sleep problems, dream problems, nightmares, and so on. But what I didn't understand before I experienced some pretty significant desync is that it's possible it turns out we don't just have circadian rhythms. We have circadian rhythms, and over the top of those, we have what we could refer to as oniric rhythms, dreaming rhythms, right? And normally these two processes are fairly synchronized. It's possible for them to desynchronize enough that we don't dream when we're asleep, and our oniric rhythms can be displaced into the daytime. So if somebody was in the situation, let's say their sleep pattern was 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. or something, under some circumstances, their oniric rhythms could be displaced so that unless they are sleeping from like noon to 3 p.m. or somewhere in there, they will not dream, or they will dream very little, and their dreams will be sort of less robust, right? So it's literally possible for the oniric rhythm to desync from the circadian rhythm. And that's a mind-blowing thing that I never imagined was possible.
So when people are sort of fasting or having experiences of denying themselves sleep, like, or just being up all night for whatever reason, those, the kind of sort of visions or sort of trippiness that can kind of come in is maybe because these rhythms are sort of being forced out of sync, and you're getting like bits of dream time in conscious time, or you're messing with your digestive rhythms, so that's kind of having a knock-on effect. So it's that sort of, yeah, interesting. I never, and
There's
I
going to
didn't.
be a little bit of background noise for a little bit here.
Is
I
it?
don't know if you can hear it. Can you?
Not at the moment, no.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. So when you spoke about, when I was talking about circadian rhythms being complex, part of what complexifies them is our digestive rhythms. When do we eat food? When do we not? Fasting will certainly affect this. I would suggest that under, in some fasting circumstances, we may experience more of the dreaming mind's presence in our waking experience. And maybe even a lot, maybe even have visions or waking dreams. One of the most profound experiences I ever had was accidental. I was working with a friend doing some hypnosis experiments. And without knowing it, the exchange was so intense, right, between us. Without knowing it, I accidentally hypnotized myself. And when our Skype call ended, one of the most astonishing things that's ever happened to me in my waking life, I started dreaming while I was awake. And what happened was so astonishing. About every 15 seconds, within a 15-second span, 3 to 5 fully formed dreams would emerge in my memory instantaneously. So there was an entire dream could take about a second or less to emerge in my mind. And they were like regular dreams, except I was awake while they were bubbling up into my consciousness every few moments, right? So I'm fully awake and aware, and fully formed, completed dreams are just bubbling up in my consciousness. And
So are you experiencing them in those moments as memories, like you've just woken up and you remember the dream, or are you actually having is there a sort of mixing of the visual of waking life and dream life?
it's
Describe
really
that
weird.
more.
It was like I had a two-track mind in this case. The waking mind track was continuous, and it was punctuated without being interrupted, right, by fully formed dreams, I would have the whole experience of the dream, its continuum, its span, in an instant, right?
But it had
So,
some sense of chronology, even though it was in an instant. There was a
mhm,
you experienced it as a progression of.
yes.
Okay. Yep.
So there could be an hour of content in there, but as it
Continuous.
played in my mind, it only took a second.
Yeah.
The really astonishing thing to me about that experience, and I would love to be able to reproduce it. I don't know. I know sort of the recipe, right? But I've never tried to reproduce the experience. Um, the astonishing thing is that the dreams were tagged as having taken place in my actual waking world. So they were tagged in my mind as waking world experiences, not as dreams. I knew they were dreams, but they weren't tagged that way, right? They were tagged as something that just happened to me while I'm awake,
Hmm.
which was fascinating to me.
So I guess more like a vision or something. What I don't know what I would sort of
I've
call.
had visions.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a vision.
Okay.
In fact, it's really like a dream. I've just never had that form of dreaming before, and I was not aware it was possible.
So what?
Uh,
Talk a bit about what do you think that like these two minds, the sort of waking mind, the conscious waking mind, and the dreaming mind? Because obviously, I mean, my experience of dreaming and waking is there's this witness in both of them, which seems common
yes.
to both, but there's a very different quality that they overlap in a lot of ways in sort of in terms of visuals and feelings, emotion, sensation even, but there's somehow the quality's different. The rules don't apply in the dream, or they're optional in the dreaming world, whereas the waking world seems to be more stuck in its rules. Whether or
Yes.
not that is the case, or we're just that's how we're experiencing it. And all the time I'm thinking, is this something to do with left and right hemispheres and their relationship? I mean, what do you think about that?
So these are very complex questions, and I think what's useful at the outset here is just to say, um, I'll share some of my perspectives. I don't believe them to be true. They're not my beliefs. They're things that I'm toying with in an attempt to gain insight, right? That's always my goal. I want to see better if there's any way to do that. Um,
I
and
think
preferably
that's Darren.
together.
That's a good statement to just for everything. I mean that's probably
Yes.
how I approach life now. Like there's no conviction in anything anymore. It's just let's see. Yeah.
Well, we've certainly been thrown into a time of radical intrusion of ambiguity
Mm,
and a lot of negative ambiguity, actually,
mm,
in a fairly short period of time for us moderns. Our technologies certainly have affected not just our minds, but our genomes,
mm.
and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. But I think there's a guy on TikTok. His name might be Tom McClellan. He's um, a Hebrew scholar and a religious scholar, and he's brilliant. And he had a little. I'm not a big fan of TikTok. I almost never watched it. This is one of the only things I've watched on TikTok. But he said a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. First, he referenced Korzybski. Do you know him, Alfred
Yeah,
Korzybski?
a little bit, not that much.
Right.
But yeah, yeah.
So
No,
Korzybski, I'll speak briefly about him in a
sure.
little while, but not to get stuck here. I'll try to keep it fluid. Um, he said two things that I remind myself of every day that I learned in graduate school. are that the map is not the territory. That's a Korzybskian saying.
Okay.
And what he means by that is that our representations of things are not those things.
Mm.
So he falsifies the Aristotelian law of identity, which is A equals A, right? A man is always a man. A man can't be both a man and not a man. And Korzybski basically says A equals not A. Whatever you might think something is, it is not that. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a really important tool that we should probably give all children. Maybe we don't want to confuse them right out the gate, but we should definitely teach them that our representational systems are just that. They are toys of convenience, right? They're not laws. Whatever a tree might be, it is not a tree.
Mm.
And then the other thing he says is all theories are wrong. Some theories are useful.
Mm.
These are really important things to remember.
This is such a profound point that as you're speaking, I'm remembering that I've been kind of feeling and thinking around this quite frequently and more in recent times, that there's this blindness that seems to be prevalent to how ignorant we actually are, and always are, and it's a constant state, and we do uncover things and things have a use, like you're saying, but there's also often, maybe always, a time span associated with that use, and you get to the end of it. And we have, you know what I mean, we have these kind of theories that people have, and then they become the thing, and then somewhere down the line they get disproved and the next thing comes along, and we don't remember that. So we get stuck on certainties and create all kinds of hell, because it just doesn't, as you're saying, it doesn't equal reality in any way. It's just a hold for the moment on something, but it isn't an understanding of what's really going on. So I think I just wanted to flag that up, because I feel like it's probably one of the most important things to remember at this time, as the sort of certainty is all being shaken apart, that this is actually the natural state of things, and it's okay. It's more about it's more about finding that relationship, the healthy relationship with that. Like this idea of the mystery, say, from the American cultures, the sort of original ones. The kind of the top of the pile is this mystery, is you basically can't understand it. That seems like a really sensible, wise, intelligent perspective to build your kind of reality on.
It's a beautiful thing to say. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately in some ways and unfortunately in others, certainly unfortunately for most of the complex animals on Earth being subject to what humans do, the waking mind is very grasping oriented, right? It wants to get a grip on things. And there's lots of interesting features of this problem. I'm going to go a little bit further than I went a moment ago, and I'm going to suggest that all knowledge is false. Knowledge is actually wrong. And that's a big leap beyond, all theories are wrong. Knowledge is cached insight. The insight was alive. The knowledge is sort of the dead structured remains of this. And this is what we give. Say again?
A fossil.
Yes, brilliant. This is what we give to our children and what we learn to manipulate in consciousness. It would be fascinating if we could suddenly be relieved of that, right? If there was some way that we could just be completely relieved of the burden of sustaining the entire structure of knowledge that we ordinarily manipulate and navigate within. I've had some experiences like that. Now, when I say that knowledge is false, surely there must be something that isn't false, something that we could actually trust, right? And of course, religions tell us that what we can trust is God, right? Or particular books, which is a pretty bizarre idea. But I think there is something that's true, and it's the memory of origin, right? Like the memory of before representational thought, the felt sense of being, the essence of being, is a memory of something. We could use different words to describe it, but communion is one way of describing it, if we take the religious overtones off.
So when you
So I
say
think,
memory, though, Darin, when you're saying a memory of being rather than the actual experience of being, clarify that.
so perhaps memory isn't the right word. And this is a thorny topic. We may have gotten a little too deep too quick here, or I may have. But it's hard for me to know where to go here.
Yeah, don't let me stop the flow. It doesn't matter. Just,
No, I think it's really important. If I was willing to build this bridge, I should somehow drag us at least some part way across it, right?
Mhm.
I want you to imagine, I want to show you one of my favorite toys. You can understand that if we take a strobe light and we amplify the frequency dramatically, even though the light is flashing, it will appear to us to always be on. All right. And I'm going to give the short version here. So what I want you to imagine is a light that is always off twice the amount of time that it's on. Okay. And let's just speed that up to 1,000,000 flashes per second. It's still off twice the amount of time it's on, but we would have no way of really, if the rate were high enough, we'd have no way of detecting that it was off at all.
Sure.
So what I want you to imagine, just for kicks, not necessarily claiming this is how things are, but it's a really interesting thought experiment. Imagine that everything in the universe is collapsing to perfect unity when the light is off. And when it's on, when it's in unity, there's an incredible shared sort of transmission in the unity of all of the knowledge in all of time, right? Not just the universe is collapsing, but time itself, the entire span of time is collapsing too. So there's a collapse to unity, and then there's an expansion to separate things, right? And most of the time this isn't here. But in the same way that it looks, the strobe light looks like it's always on, all of these things look like they're always separate and distinct. So in this case, anything you could drag back to the distinction phase from the collapse phase would be the memory of origin, right? And it's my strong suspicion that people who think of themselves as psychic, and also people who make discoveries, are doing precisely this. They're dragging information back from the unity phase.
Okay. Wow, interesting. So that's the kind of vibration, isn't it? That sort of going between. That is
Yeah.
the essential vibration.
Now, this is just a toy.
Yeah.
What's actually going on is way more interesting than this, but it probably resembles it, in my view. And that's an amazing thing. It this idea validates the trope that we hear all the time. Oh, it's all one. Right? It is all one, actually, most of the time. Right? A tiny portion of the time it's not one, but most of the time it's just one, right? Or even none, right? Because you can only have one if there's another,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's
So
that's what the phrase should be.
yeah,
We're all none, or it's all gone. Yeah.
it's all gone. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Gone to unity. So I think love and altruism and empathy are features of our natural relationship with origin, if origin is understood to be the moment of unity, right? But also great discoveries, Einstein's insights, Gödel's insights, Francis Crick, the DNA model, these insights, they probably have a relationship with this feature of how I think about, the nature of things. And this is something that was shown to me a long time ago, something I experienced directly. So I call it a toy, and I'm not trying to convince anyone of its truth. But I think it's a very useful idea that solves lots of unusual problems that are otherwise pretty difficult to solve.
Mm. And it's kind of paradoxical by nature in a way, isn't it? Because both things are there all the time. It's the nothing and
Hmm.
something all together. And I wonder, it's like, is the right brain the kind of the connector to the sort of unity, the origin, and is the left brain the sort of divider, the splitter, the kind of
Yes, I
pointer?
think very much so. For anyone listening, I will joyfully recommend one specific book about hemispheric lateralization, which is a topic that fascinates me. I've worked peripherally with a neuroscientist for about 20 years now, and we've had long conversations about all kinds of topics related to neuroscience. But there's a single book that I think is extremely valuable, and the book after that is probably good too. A guy named Ian McGilchrist
Oh yeah,
wrote a book
yeah. I
called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, I think is the subtext. And then he's recently come out with a 2-volume magnum opus called The Matter with Things.
I've been
And
listening to. He's got a series on his channel. He's got a series of um, videos he's releasing discussing each chapter through the book. So that's my lazy way of reading the book. Just it's great because he's in conversation with this. I think he's a physicist, a young guy who I don't know what their relationship is, but he's just talking through each chapter and some of the sort of the topics within. So I recommend
wonderful.
that for anyone to sort of check out as a way into that. Um, you know, if you
I feel like he saved me from writing that book because I had a
yeah, looks
number
like
of
it was a big
essays.
job as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a number of essays that um, certainly are consonant with his way of thinking about and talking about our hemispheres, which we should realize are basically a thin layer on the top of the brain, right? We're talking about probably less than an inch of tissue on the top of the brain, and it's the tissue that's folded.
Wow.
Um, and then those two layers are both connected and distinguished by the corpus callosum. Obviously, you know, it sounds fun to sing the praises of, oh, the corpus callosum connects the hemispheres. Yeah, but a lot of what it does is keep them from producing feedback loops so that
Yeah.
we don't
It
have
stops
epileptic
them
fits.
falling out, fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or driving
Um,
nuts. Yeah.
Fascinatingly, it seems very clear that ancient peoples were profoundly aware of our polar nature in this regard. There's an Ojibwe picture story, which you can see on my YouTube channel. If you look up Darin Stevenson and you look through my hundreds of videos, you'll see a yellow picture with a spiral. And a man named Wayne Rector briefly describes the story. It's unfortunate that I have not yet been able to get, Wayne died. I haven't been able to find someone who actually knows the detail of the story. But it's a spiral and it's a creation story.
Mm.
And hilariously, once the earth sort of settles on solid ground, she comes down from the sky and settles on solid ground. She gives birth to two boys. And one of them has a giant right hand and one of them has a giant left hand. And they get in a fight, and the kid with the giant left hand ends up underneath the ground. And by the way, different animals are associated with each of the boys.
Mm-hmm.
So you see here the same kind of story as Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
And I strongly believe that whatever Genesis is, it's a catastrophically redacted fragment of something that was probably an entire book at some point in history. But in the Navajo beauty way traditions, the two boys are called, Cain is called Slayer of Alien Gods, essentially. It's the rough translation. And Hevel is called Little Water of the Moon. And in that story, they don't fight. They cooperate, right? Which is the first story I've seen where they don't fight. Obviously, when we were children, they didn't have to fight. See, the weird thing is, when we were little, dreaming erased most of representation every night. But after a time, there was enough structure left over when we awoke that you could start to, build the construct for, build the substrate for representational cognition. And once that gets firmly established, it mostly kills off the dreaming mind. But certain features of that mind survive, right? And differently in different people. There are probably some adults who can still truly play the way that we did when we were children, or at least under some circumstances, they can truly play the way that we did when we were little. And it wasn't mere dreaming that we were doing when we were little, because of course we were awake. We were in the physical world with the dreaming mind with us, right? And it wasn't as if necessarily we had dreams. The dream is a sort of compressed version of what the dreaming mind is capable of, I think. But one of the things I was talking about earlier was just that I think the dreaming mind, quote unquote, right, is very interested in why the world ends every night and what's on the other side of that barrier, in the same way that we wonder about what's on the other side of death, right? The dreaming mind dies every night. It's quite familiar with dying. It does it multiple times in a night, right? Because dreams come to an end. And so the world of that dream usually ends, although sometimes content from that world is preserved into the next visionary experience. There's so much fascinating content here. I was really surprised to realize that things could become so desynchronized that our oniric rhythms could be shifted into the daytime. And this is something that happened to me, so I know. It took me quite a while to figure out what was going on. Under that circumstance, we're much more inclined to have nightmares for a simple reason. The body and the waking mind is aware that we're not supposed to be asleep at this time, right? We were supposed to be conducting waking life. And so it will use various mechanisms to put an end to the dream. And one of the easiest for it to use is conflict.
Yeah,
right.
Because a nightmare is a body kind of waking up bringing the waking mind back online because you need to pee or you're too hot or something, and it's
Yeah.
just kind of it murders you or shocks you awake. So
Yes.
same sort of thing, right? Yeah.
But there are, yes. So I've coined this phrase, the dream assassin, because literally in my dreams, a guy who doesn't belong there shows up, and I would just be furious, and I would try to hit him, and he would get happier and laugh at me, and I couldn't hit him. The punches don't work in dreams. I would try to scream, but just gurgling would come out, like yelling at this person because I'm really angry. And I very rarely have experiences of anger or violence in dreams myself. Lots of people do. So I came up with this idea that there's a faculty that wakes up under certain conditions, and its job is to end the dream. It's the assassin of the dream world, right? And that faculty is really, really interesting for a number of reasons. One, in the dreaming world, it's nearly omnipotent, right? It pushes a button, the dream goes down, right? It's that simple. Hilariously, well, I'll go on a little bit before I tell a story. So in the dreaming world, that faculty is omnipotent, and it dissolves when it succeeds, right? The faculty that does this, the sort of dream assassin character that shows up, ends when the dream ends, right? So it ends itself too. But it doesn't always have to be violent. I'll give you a couple of interesting examples. A friend of mine told me of a dream that he had a few nights ago, in which, and this is right at the end of his dreaming cycle, right? He's about to wake up. Someone in the dream turned to him and said, "Do you know what Miss Piggy's first name is?" Right? It's that representational. Another person was at an airport and someone showed them some legal documents and demanded their identification, right? These are representational. These things don't fit in dreaming, right? These are waking world constructs. So sometimes you can introduce certain aspects of representational consciousness that don't require conflict to collapse the dreaming manifold.
It's just their presence and their way of being jars the dream state, or kind of, don't know, I'm getting the hemisphere thing again. It's like, the left
Yes.
brain sends in the assassin to kind of, because it's the only way you can stop the dream from lasting forever, maybe,
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
also it's Cain kills Abel all over again, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's literally Cain kills Abel. So I was having these experiences and I didn't know what was going on. And I hadn't yet realized that my oniric rhythms had separated from my circadian rhythms. That was the first realization. And then I had the realization while I was talking with a close friend of mine who's rapidly schizophrenic, someone I love deeply. I've known him for 20 years. I talk with him almost every night. And interestingly, it was in talking with him and listening to, he has an aspect of his consciousness that wants to end everything. It wants to destroy the sun. It thinks all people should die. Everything needs to be destroyed, right? It's just this raging, impotent, destructive force. And I was listening to him and I suddenly realized, what if the dream assassin crossed over into waking consciousness where it's completely impotent? Hitler, Trump, Putin, right? They want to end the world in a sense, or they want to control or whatever it is that, is going on.
Yeah.
Without needing to say like specific people or whatever, we can recognize something like this in suicide bombers or people who in mass shooting incidents and things like this. And we want an explanation for this. This might help us learn something about what's going on there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I know a little bit of the recipe again of how to produce something like this. Not that I would ever attempt to do that. But I know something about the recipe from having studied the schizophrenic mind. So the story I wanted to tell is, so first I realized my oniric rhythms had separated, right? And then I got the idea of the dream assassin, a trope, right? A few nights later, I had a very elaborate dream in which I was in a post-apocalyptic version of the city I live in, San Francisco. And I had an African companion, and we were traveling around at night, and there was like fires, and the city's sort of an adventure nightmare wonderland kind of thing. And we end up in this really sketchy area of town where there's a lot of like people selling drugs and hitmen and, you know, prostitution and sort of sketchy stuff going on. And it's outdoors, but it's like a labyrinth. And we get separated. And this is like 3 nights after I came up with the idea of the dream assassin. And I end up on this alley that's got fences on both sides. And I turn around and I see that an actual assassin, like in Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like a guy all in leather, black leather with knives all over him, right? Is coming for me. And there's no way out, right? He's coming. And so he gets up to me and he's got these 2 knives and he goes to stab me. And I sort of raise my arms and block the knives. And then I just vocalized what I now think of as hypnotic monosyllables, like pum, hern, right? And with each syllable, he relaxed. And after 3 syllables, he was unconscious, and I held him in my arms. I laid him on the ground. I took all his knives and walked away and kept dreaming. And after that, it didn't happen anymore.
Wow, interesting.
Right? So now I'm not claiming that that means my theory is correct or anything like that. A mind is a very complex thing. It's hard to trust simple explanations for complex phenomena.
But it's interesting to engage actively in the sort of operating system of dreaming in that way, instead of, you know, because I feel like perhaps most people experience dreams in a more passive way, where it's just something that's happening to them and they're doing stuff in the dream, but that's within the dream. They're not doing stuff to control the dream, you know, on that kind of meta level. Whereas that's like that move that you just described is like tinkering, you know, with the actual engineering or the structure of it. Or
it is, but I have to admit that in my waking mind, I did not have that intention. And in that specific dream, what happened just seemed completely natural and intuitively obvious. Like, it wasn't like I thought it through.
No, but
I was frightened.
that's the waking mind, right? But the dreaming mind, that bit of the dreaming mind that maybe isn't accessed that often, is perhaps what you were using. So, you know, it was the dreaming mind that made the decision to do that, not the
Yes.
waking mind. So,
Yeah, so it wasn't something I figured out.
Yeah. Exactly, because that's a different language, right? It speaks
It
a different
totally
language.
is. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
So just
so
to throw something
please go
else in,
ahead.
carry on, but I just want to throw this in as well. So we've been kind of talking about the hemispheres there, but there's also the older parts of the brain, aren't there? The mammalian brain, the reptile, and then there's the heart brain, there's the stomach brain. You know, there's a lot of different places where, and maybe this is where those rhythms you're talking about are located, or the origin of these rhythms are in these different brains that we have, you know, within the body. Just kind of throwing that in, like how these things all interact, you know, just putting that in. With, it's not a question, or I'm just putting it there. I'm thinking about how do all these different brains we have get involved, and you know, what are those relationships? Are there conversations which could be had between right brain and gut? you know, oh, are you still there? I seem to have lost you. He's disappeared. Well, this is a little aside while I wait for him to return. This is quite intellectual for me. I'm not really. Oh, here he is. But I like it. Hey.
My iPhone overheated.
Uh-oh. Too many brains.
Hilarious. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, good.
So look, I think very deeply and am fascinated by hemispheric lateralization. And I want to be really clear. Certainly people have proposed that animals, are lateralized. It seems fairly obvious that they are. Birds experience a transformation in handedness during mating season. But I've discovered, and it's blatantly obvious to me, that insects are lateralized. They
tell us about what experiences you've had that led you to believe that. That's interesting.
Flies will turn in a specific toward. They do the same thing birds do, right? And I can't remember exactly how it works, but I think it's threats get the right eye and opportunities or food get the left eye. That kind of stuff.
Well,
they
have two eyes, right? Anything
right.
that has that kind of,
they're bilaterally symmetrical animals, just like we are.
Yeah.
The thing about insects that's fascinating, and it's something I can't help but sing the praises of, when you have a creature like the housefly, I want people to understand that their evolutionary age is impossible to get a grasp on. If you're running, let's say 40 billion animals per season, and you get to do that over 4 million years, the evolutionary age of a housefly is staggering. It's nothing like the evolutionary age of a mammal.
Sure.
Right? So what happens then when you're able to, quote, run that many experiments, if that's how we think about it, and there are other useful ways to think about it, is that you get physical intelligence. The intelligence is offloaded into the structure of the organism, its nervous system, and so on, right? Instead of the kind of intelligence that we think of as intelligence, which is brains, right? It's very clear that you don't need an incredibly large brain to be highly intelligent. Praying mantises are staggeringly intelligent, and they have a brain that's the size of maybe, well, when they're born, their brain is the size of like a 50th of a pinhead, right? And as an adult, they might have a pinhead's worth of brain. But those creatures are intelligent enough to have relationships with humans and to be fascinated by humans and interested in humans and so on, right? So I think we mistake the idea of intelligence as relating to brain power, but we should understand that most of the organisms of Earth have offloaded trillions of endless experiments into physical structure so that the housefly is physically intelligent, right? The structure of the organism handles most of what we would think a brain would be required for. It's not. Now, of course, what's the milieu of the housefly? But go ahead.
Just just as you're talking there, because I mean I was sort of saying these brains, but my sort of intuition and to some degree experience is that intelligence cannot exist without the whole body. And I wonder if, even as I heard you talking, then I was thinking, is there actually a kind of cloud as well that is part of our intelligence? The context we're in somehow holds, the intelligence as well. It's not this at all. I mean, this may be a vital part of the instrumentation or whatever, but
Hmm.
the whole intelligence seems to exist beyond my physical limits, and it's not clear where one intelligence that and again, it's this kind of discrete thing where we're trying to chop it all up, but it seems to me that there is this kind of interacting field of intelligences that maybe make a kind of super intelligence that we're all reliant on,
We
profoundly.
agree. We agree.
Mm.
Um, if you had a glass of water on your table and you didn't put it there, and you watched it over a few days, and the water evaporated, and in the bottom of the water you saw some white material, and you took the white material out and you tasted it and you realized it was salt, right? Then you would know that the water was salty, right? You get salt crystals from salty water in this case, yeah? So if you think about Earth as the glass of water and time space as the water, right? What you would find here are crystallizations of the intelligences in time space or the intelligence in the medium itself, right? You get all these forms that are unique expressions of the nature of time space, right? The humans keep forgetting that Earth is a planet in space. We think only alien planets are weird, right? This is a normal planet, and
Hmm.
those other planets are really exotic. No, this is an exotic planet, right? All the organisms here are literally the faces, can be understood in this way anyway, as the faces of the character of time space itself. So yes, I certainly believe that we have entirely the wrong idea about what space is. Being the sky, what the sky is what I mean. It's a very clinical and abstract idea, and it has nearly nothing to do with what's going on up there. It seems to me that the nature of the universe is transcendentally intelligent, and it makes little crystallizations of that down here, right? In a very simple toy of it. Yeah. So, yes. And I also think that the intelligences here form a field. The humans think, you kill off the whales, we'll be fine. Wrong.
Mm.
Bad idea,
Mm.
right? All of the intelligences here contribute to a field effect that our minds hitchhike on.
Mm.
And if you crash that effect or replace it with machines, our minds are going to crash.
Mm.
Right?
Well,
Machines don't interact with that field, in my view.
yeah. Well, this, the viral intelligence, the bacterial intelligence, these
Yes.
ancient intelligences
Yes.
that we
Yes.
have this kind of mad idea that, that they're trying to kill us or something. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of everything.
Mm-hmm.
It that, and this is a big one for me right now, because my particular fascination is the soil, like the soil as the substrate for everything living on Earth. In
I
interaction.
would just add one feature. It's the soil and the water. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was going to say interacting with sunlight, the water, the kind of the other stuff, but the soil is this kind of interface where everything is mixing, and it's so complex in there. And we are, science is so far behind in its exploration of what that is. And you
Well,
only have,
if you start with the wrong idea, if your
yeah,
first moves, right, your
yeah,
first principles are
yeah,
bad, it's pretty hard to correct that.
sure.
Um, by the way, Sadhguru would agree about the soil.
Oh yeah, I did actually catch a bit of him talking about that, and it was like, oh great, people are starting to, it's becoming a thing that people are talking about, because it's the massive blind spot I'm seeing right now in the way that in the West anyway, and rapidly the rest of the world, the way we're farming, where we're just sterilizing the soil, we're killing the soil, and that is catastrophic for everything.
We agree.
It's bigger than
Intelligence.
anything else that we're doing in terms of its harm, I would say. To the kind of,
Um,
well, there are so many things, but let's not go into that.
that's that's certainly huge. But the poisoning of the oceans is a similar problem.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, what the humans have done, and they don't realize this yet, but they're going to get a clue right quick. They've created an evolutionary filter, right? An evolutionary wall. And I can describe it by just talking about tigers and guns. Still with me? Okay. So when guns were first introduced, there were enough tigers left that the tigers could evolve. But by the time there were a lot of guns, the numbers of experiments the tigers could run evolutionarily shrank dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't out-evolve guns. Now, there was an interesting phenomenon, if I understand this correctly, in South America, where some of the first men that went down there to try to kill jaguars with guns died. A lot of them died. Most of them died. And in order to learn to hunt jaguars, they had to learn from the jaguar hunters of South America, and they had to hunt them with spears. There's a book about this called Tigrero. What I'm getting at is I don't know whether the Earth can sustain 7.8 billion humans, but I do know that it can't sustain 50 billion machines. We always hear people talking about the human population problem, but we never hear them talking about the object population problem.
That is interesting.
And we
Yeah.
really need to think about object population if we're thinking about problems with the biosphere and things like this. My point, though, is that we're creating a situation where there's a, a, a wall for the complex animals of Earth, and they will not pass that wall. They can't evolve fast enough. Once you shrink a population to a certain size, it can't, quote unquote, run enough experiments to either survive or pass the filter, right? And so we've created this sort of hard structured filter, and we think we can pass it. We will not pass it.
Yeah.
That filter will filter off complex life on Earth, one way or another, right? So all the complex animals, it's a hard filter. If we continue doing what we're doing the way that we're doing it, we being the species as a whole, which by the way has no governing body, right? As far as the humans are concerned, if you can invent it, do so. There's no, right? There's nothing we won't do. There's no thing we won't do, right? And now where we have technologies like CRISPR, I was aware of this 40 years ago almost. I realized one day, oh shit, somebody is going to figure out how to level a threat to life on Earth directly, and then they will level that threat, right? And then I saw vectors of how this could be done, and then I saw models of how it could be done, and now I'm pretty sure I could do it. But someone will do that. We're now at the point in technology where a single human being or a group of 5 to 10 people technologically have the capacity to level a threat, at least to the humans, but definitely to life on Earth. And so that's a very grim thing to think about. But this is McGilchrist's argument, right? There's no right hemisphere in human civilization. It's just Cain, right? There's no governing body. There's nothing to tell you no. And by the way, one of the best things the right hemisphere does is say no, right? Socrates' daimon only told him what not to do, right? It only said, no, don't do that, right? And that's why when he went to trial, he had consulted his daimon and it said, no problem. So he was willing to die because his daimon didn't tell him not to, right? It was okay. Now, this daimon idea is very complex, and it's something that fascinates me. I'm going to suggest something briefly here, which is that it's my strong suspicion that ancient humans were directly in contact with non-human intelligences. And in fact, I believe our minds were born in symbiotic union with those intelligences, and we used to hitchhike on them. And at some point, the species went through something like we go through as a child, where representational cognition overwhelmed the dreaming faculties and the faculties that are capable of connecting with the sky beings, for lack of a better word. And there was a terrible crisis. The humans became terrified. This was the birth of religions. The gods have departed us. Why has this happened? We must be bad. We've done something terrible. And weirdly, the religious books they're like a form of schizophrenic representation gone haywire, right? It's as if the humans went mad when the gods disappeared and wrote these sort of bizarre, half insane books, partly remembering and partly explaining why they went away, and they went away because we're bad, But it's my strong suspicion, and it's not my suspicion from thinking, it's my suspicion from experience. I've had an experience of contact with a non-human intelligence many years ago that lasted for quite some time and was far more astonishing than anything I ever imagined possible. So I think our minds are the remnants of something we have no conception of, which was the moment-to-moment direct experience of being with, in our minds, having other minds with ours, right? The minds of non-human intelligences. And I don't think they were embodied. I think they're part of the nature of the substrate of time-space, whatever that is.
So this is so interesting. So is it, what was the cause of that separation, or is it possible that there was a necessary, like a sort of pendulum swing, like we had to go one side where we had this contact and then go to the other side where we are now, which feels like maybe we're at the end of that pendulum swing, I don't know, or is there a kind of, if you think about sort of, those kind of models of psychosocial development, which are spirals that go from left to right, but upwards or onwards, or, in a direction. Do you think maybe there's something like that going on, that we might then come back in on another level back to that relationship with the intelligences? Or is there, there is a sense in me sometimes now where I think, or are we just becoming obsolete in terms of the turn evolution has taken, and there is this kind of machine, evolution going on that seems to be just devouring everything for its own sort of continuance? And I don't know, that's a lot of things together, but what do you think about that?
The problem seems to coincide with the onset of city building. Problem in the evolution of human consciousness seems to me to coincide with the onset of city building, think about that carefully. Instead of living in a world of relationships, you're now living literally in a representation,
Mm. Yeah, and
right?
it's separate from it as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
humans have created a weird kind of outer space inside nature where we're trying to evict life, right? Our homes, our cars, all these things, computers, and so on.
Well, computers,
Um,
we've gone another level. We were in cities and now we've gone into the internet. You know, we've gone even deeper
yeah,
into the
or the
cave.
internet's gone into us, one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I
So,
mean is like we've taken that jump, haven't we, even further away from life, as you say? Because,
yes,
you know,
it's really weird.
mm,
We, in the 60s and 70s, there's always this promise that technology is going to save us from technology. Very unlikely. The only thing that I think might give us hope is the possibility of establishing an intelligent society somewhere on Earth, right? There have been lots of models of this in science fiction. It's not an impossible task, it's a conceivable thing. I can even imagine ways of going about it. And certainly on a small scale, right? 5 people, you can do it, right? Um, Most of the reason we don't get some of the advances that we might otherwise enjoy is there's a kind of gravity to language, societies, culture, and so on that's very strong.
mm,
And we also don't have, we need somebody or a few people who have contact. If not with non-human intelligences in time space, with the non-human intelligences on Earth in a significant way, right? We'd have to reestablish that contact. And that's something I think our minds are born for. I think we were born for this. I know that when I had the experience I had, um, immediately I was like, this is what I was made for, right? I was made to participate in this relation. This is everything that I've been missing. This is everything I've been starving for. Um, and look, that was a very problematical experience because I'm a regular human being,
mm.
just like all of us, right? And prior to that, I depended on representational consciousness. Now I was introduced to something so far beyond representational consciousness that that stuff looks like garbage. It looks like radioactive waste. You wouldn't even want to touch it. You wouldn't play with it one time, right? If we had this other other thing, and of course, I remember the first time I ever did psychedelics, and I'm not profoundly experienced with psychedelics. I haven't done ayahuasca or something like that, but I've had some modest experience with them. I was completely fascinated by the experience, but there was also a feature of like, this is mimicking something it's not really delivering. And when I had the experience in my late 30s of contact, it only delivered. There was no mimicry. It was pure delivery. And the insights that I had during that experience and what I was taught and what I was shown, large portions of that were translatable into things I could share with other humans. The toy about the strobe light, right,
Mhm.
is one of those things.
Mhm.
And most of the way that I would do that was through analogy or metaphor, rather than just a hard model. It's all very dangerous, though. You see, there's this problem, which is apparently, again, I like to think of Genesis as a puzzle, and I'm very interested in the tree incident because that's where everything seems to go wrong. And there's this weird problem there, which is, and I love to tell stories about this, so I'm going to try to keep this really simple. Apparently, just before Eve was born, God told Adam something like, of all the trees in the garden you may eat, except of the tree in the midst of the garden. And by the way, that word midst doesn't mean middle. It literally means cut. It's the Hebrew root is tavek, and it means where things are separated. So it would be analogous to your belly button, right? Where you were separate, where you were cut away from your mother, literally. And so the angel of dividing things is there, right? He didn't say you can't eat of the tree of life. He said you can't eat of the tree of knowledge. But when we ate of the tree of knowledge, and of course it's framed as the knowledge of good and evil, which is a bipolar construct that definitely will lead to trouble. Then the tree of life, they set an angel at the tree of life with a sword that spins in every direction at once, so that we don't also eat of the tree of life and become as the gods are. Now it could, so obviously the tree of life was accessible prior to eating of the tree of knowledge, but once we ate of the tree of knowledge, we had to be kept away from the tree of life. This is the problem. If I could introduce people, suppose that I could actually introduce people to the intelligences that I met, right? What would they do with that knowledge? You can't give that knowledge to humans. And this is actually the problem we have with science. Science isn't intrinsically bad, but ethically, it's blatantly obvious that you should never give the findings of science to industrial, capitalist, technological, war-making societies, right? Any scientist should realize that almost all of the findings that you will produce will be turned to nefarious ends and lethal ends, pretty much without exception. You know, some people would say things like, oh, well, it's really just a problem of energy. If the humans had free energy, we could solve all these problems. No. If you gave the humans free energy, we'd be dead in 6 months. Everything would be gone, right? They just build machines that build machines, and nothing would stop them. There's nothing to inhibit what happens at the level of the species, right? And obviously there are models of why this is so, right? There are processes that are essentially running humans. And there's nothing governing those processes. And they might as well be demons, right? For the effect that they have. They're endlessly hungry, extremely domineering processes that have zero ethical concern. Their concern is propagation, domination. If you think of a network of human minds as an environment, and you think of the transports in that environment, there are organism-like processes, transports, reproduce, and propagate new subforms. Yeah. And superforms too. And there's nothing that inhibits that, right? So the humans are really, really dangerous. And it could, I mean, I think it's very likely that Earth turns out to be important in time-space due to the incredible biological diversity and intelligence that's here. This is part of a network. So if we burn down that network, it fucks up time-space, right? This is a mode of time-space. And we are modes of time-space. So if you replace that with machines in which time is no longer relational at all and is completely mechanized, probably that's damaging local time-space, right? Think of the entire history of the Earth, all just billions of forms of life thriving together, right? With occasional extinction events and such, but all of it's organic. And then like in the past, 300 years, we've started making endless quantities of machines and then computers and so on and so forth. Those things they seem to me to be the antithesis of nature and intelligence. So I'm concerned.
So Darin, is it a phase of development? Like, you know, in a human life, there's that period, the sort of teenage period, which can be quite like what we're seeing on a global level. It's very self-interested. It doesn't have, it's kind of, it's breaking away from something earlier, but it's not yet formed into something that can kind of function usefully within the context of the community. Or it's this sort of quite destructive, quite self-obsessed, prone to kind of fuck ups and taking huge risks. And is it a phase like that, which is, that I've often seen it like that everything you said makes sense. It's, we create these things which have tremendous power, but if we don't have the self-regulation or the intelligence or the wisdom to use it well, then it causes terrible problems. So is it that, there's a kind of center of gravity which I feel is perhaps breaking up a bit, and we are moving a bit beyond the kind of corporate mind, like the corporate sort of the corporations are sort of like the sort of epitome of this mindset, really, aren't they? I mean, that's
Mhm.
what's come to be the sort of defining feature of that way of being. And it feels like we're perhaps at the kind of end of that, but it's not yet clear, or, there's possibility appearing. But is it a phase, or is it a mental illness? Is it a kind of collective mental illness, or is it a kind of, does life run these kind of mad experiments and then they fuck up and die, like it has done, it seems, with things like dinosaurs? Or I don't know. What do you think about that?
So it's certainly a phase, right? That's a fact. That seems factual to me. Though facts are a game. It really, what it depends on is why we're thinking about it. Our answer will depend on why we're thinking about it. And you'll find this is one of the most fascinating aspects of human consciousness and thought. Our purposes determine what we find, right? Our purposes predetermine the species of the insights or the discoveries. So if our purpose is just to sort of clinically examine the earth as a sequence of evolutionary heartbeats, right? Then of course, yes. And I could think of an argument for this that resembles brain development. I'm not sure if you're aware of what prion proteins are. They are, prions are sort of weird. What's interesting about prions, in a sense, is that they're not organisms and they're not viruses, but they propagate. They have some features of life-like processes. So prions produce mad cow disease. But in the early development of brains, prions kill off a huge percentage of the existing neurons. They just wipe them out. And that produces the useful structure that we later, use as, that later becomes our brains. And something not dissimilar happens with our hands, right? This started out as a paddle, but we had to get rid of the stuff in here to get this very useful structure. For me, I am a biophile, fundamentally. And I've always been that way. And everything that I've learned and seen inclines me to deeply value the incredible precious rarity of a planet in space-time with liquid water that is safe for periods long enough to develop these and keep them, right? Water eyes. You're not going to find these all over the place, right? You could point up at the sky and go 1,000 light years along that line, you won't find these, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think the most precious asset around here are the remnants of the anciently conserved ecologies. Certainly, there's no technology. I would dispose of all human technology in a heartbeat for the sake of an ant, right? That's maybe my mania,
Mm.
right? For me, the remnants of the anciently conserved ecologies are the most precious thing around here. And it's hard for me to imagine intelligent beings that would not see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we don't know the big plan, if there's a plan. We can imagine lots of scenarios on living worlds where the organisms become so profoundly advanced in their relationships that technology is meaningless to them. They would never need a machine. Anything that a machine could do, organisms can do better, is my simple point.
Mm.
So I'm also, as well as being a biophile, I'm a Luddite, right? Or a neo-Luddite or something like this, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But sure, it's a phase, and yes, something will come of it. Maybe our species is on the Earth a bit like the prion proteins in the infant's brain, right? We're here to burn off most of the structure, and then we will go away, and the next form the next what's the right word? Dominant isn't the right word, but a new form will emerge, right? Certainly possible, plausible.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Of course, the big the big sort of cherry that you kind of presented about, I don't know, 20 minutes ago was the yeah, the five people could change the world bit, and your sort of
Okay, that you hooked
your
onto that. Okay, great. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
and you're kind of, because when I contacted you about having another conversation, part of now, because I've had a bit of a break from this, what I would like to do now is just jam with people on their visions for a better way to be, or
Hmm.
not necessarily solutions, but just really just like letting it out, a vision for a better way to be. Or it could be practical, it could have solutions, but you've mentioned this thing before, and I've seen you write about it, where you talk about,
Hmm.
a small group of people that I'd like, I don't know whether this is something you've been sort of dangling it for a while in front of people. I wonder if it's time to start getting into that, because it is obviously, for anyone with an even remotely curious mind, when you say something like that, we want to know what you're talking about. Oh man, you've frozen again.
Yes, we're okay though. I missed the last part of what you said after dangling.
I was just said that, obviously anyone with a even remotely curious mind wants to know more about what you have in mind when you say that. Yeah.
I've gathered a set of toys that I think could inform experiments in this direction. Um, and also from my experience that I frame as contact with another intelligence. Certainly, our species is fundamentally, we are pod animals. We are like dolphins, bonobos, gorillas, whales. And you can see all over the place where this gets covered. Corporations are, so are armies, so are sports teams, so
Your
are rock bands,
Sorry to interrupt.
right?
Your signal is breaking up a bit. I wonder, is there somewhere in the garden where your signal is strongest? because it does keep changing. I'm
It
guessing
seemed
that's
to
what
be
it,
over. It seemed to be good here. Is it breaking up now?
no, it's good now.
Test, test.
Yeah, seems all right.
All right. So, as I was mentioning, we can see all kinds of representations of the capacity for synergy in
Mm-hmm.
small groups,
Mm-hmm.
right? People go nuts over rock bands. Why do they go that? Why do they go insane when rock bands get on stage? I mean, they will risk their lives to see one performance, you know, and you'll get 50,000 people watching a sports team pursuing a representation of what we no longer do together. I think we were born to do this together. And given a context and the freedom to experiment, we can produce an intelligent society, even if it's very small, and sustain it. It's difficult in many cases to reach adults. Adults are sort of largely entrenched in habit, reproduction, survival, and so on. Younger people are already rebellious. They already don't like what's going on, right? So it might be easier with younger people, but in any case, it's a pursuable thing. And I've had visions of this since I was very young, right? Like some wealthy guy buys a castle and they just set up shop there and start manipulating the human context directly, the same way that a team of 5 SEAL agents can completely manipulate a very complex military situation and succeed, the same way 5 surgeons can accomplish a miracle, right? I think we're born for this, actually. I think we're aching for it. And this is part of why people go nuts when they see a representation of it.
Yeah, yeah, that strikes a chord, definitely. The chords, yeah, a collection of notes, right?
Synergy, all
There it
right?
is.
Not only that, this thing right here is a model of something. Yeah.
Yes,
This is what made our brains pretty much. But
interesting.
the funny thing is, we count this as 5. Um, the being that taught me counts this as +7.
Explain.
And I'll explain. So this is a really simple version of a more complex toy. By the way, is there noise in the background?
No,
Great. So if I hold this up and ask you to count it, what will you say?
5.
Right. That's
Or,
the human count.
or I'd probably say 4 plus 1 because there's 4 of one and 1 of another.
Really good.
An
That's
important
a really good.
difference.
That's
This
a really
is
good innovation.
well, it's this thing is incredible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually this thing plus these things, but it's a little weirder than that. Let me show you why I think so. Let me see if I can safely set my phone so that it's sitting against something. Yeah. All right, so we'll call this the human count, 5, or I like yours better, 4 plus 1. But an animal would be intelligent enough to count the most important thing first, and the most important thing is the unifying body. It would count 1 for this, right? And then 1 for each of the working members, and in this case, 1 for what I'll call the thinking member. So an animal would count this as 6. But an angel, for example, would turn it over, and it would count plus for the wrist that connects it upscale to what it's an example of, and then turn it over and notice this side has divisions. This side is mostly smooth, right? There's some wrinkles and stuff, but this side is 1. So plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. Now, interestingly, across this thing, you have some astonishing stuff. that you would never be able to predict if you were just looking at this. You would never think that across this transport, you have these, and this, and this, and these, right? Upscale from here, you have astonishing synergies of incredible, unimaginable, beauty and profundity. So strangely, this is a model of this, because like my hand, I have I am one, right? I have one unifying body. I have 4 working members, each with 3 segments, right? One thinking member with 2 segments, neck and head, and a plus. And when we were talking earlier, and you were saying things like, I wonder if maybe our intelligence isn't local to us. I wonder if we're participating in a field, right? That's the plus, right? And notice that the wrist isn't connected to the thinking member. It's connected to the unifying body, right? So I would argue that the wrist for humans is in the gut. And that wrist isn't physical. If it were, it would have more mass than the universe.
Well, how do you,
so
I don't understand that bit. What do you mean by that?
I think the wrist is non-physical. If there had to be a physical connection between us and every other thing, it would have more mass than the universe.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the wrist is transcendental. It's not a physical thing. Now, the reason that I bring this up, though, is that the synergy that comes from just these parts, right? Oh, there's actually one other thing I want to say. We have this idea of fractals, yeah? But in nature, fractals aren't like fractals. In nature, fractals are like the relationship between this and this, right? Upscale from this, there's eyes, right? There's mind, there's like all these crazy things that you would never imagine if you looked at this. And so fractals are deceptive in that way. Nature uses the same principle in a very different way, where each new order represents a radical expansion of synergies. And obviously, like Buckminster Fuller was sort of onto this idea of synergistics. He's someone I learned from when I was quite young by reading his work. And he's one of my many mentors. My point, though, is just that, I think humans are made to form pods. And this has been captured and sort of weaponized by our culture and society. But it's possible to create a context where we can do that together naturally. And certainly I'm game. Obviously, it requires some kinds of resources, at the very least, time, interest, and passion. Right? And of course, we do this naturally, right? Watch a car accident, and you'll see people form a pod around that right away, right? You don't have to tell them what to do. They naturally do it. There's certain kinds of situations under which they naturally do it. We naturally do this. But I think the idea of like sports teams is hilarious to me. I mean, it's on one level, it's completely absurd. And on another level, it's a memory of what we're aching for, right? That interception. Oh my God, he had an interception. The crowd goes insane, right? Just to see a moment of physical athletic excellence. So where do we see the same principle embodied relationally and enacted relationally? That seems to me to be the key.
Yeah, interesting. And it's more like you're closer to that unity, you're closer to the...
Yes.
And that's what we're hungry for, right? We're hungry
I think,
to directly experience it.
Yes.
Not to watch it on TV or see somebody else doing something like it, but to
read. I mean, look at the films we make. All of them have pods in them, and they're all trying to accomplish an impossible mission. The mission of life on Earth is unimaginably heroic and makes our heroic stories look ridiculous. And yet, there's a a fundamental ingredient in those stories, which is authentic, right? It's just that it's getting spun for the sake of entertainment.
Well, this is what art's for, right? Art is to constantly, art in its, for me, its purpose is to jar you into remembering, oh yeah, I want that. I want the direct experience of that. And great art just shows you it and gives you an experience of it. It's like, here it is. Mm.
I think also art is the intrusion of the dream. Good art is the intrusion of the dreaming mind into waking consciousness, right? It's the, if you want to actually, a hilarious and I think profound take on the Bible is the whole Bible is all, the whole dang thing from beginning to end is literally about the humans awaiting the rebirth of Abel in waking society. And every time that starts to happen, it gets executed, right?
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Whenever an embodiment.
Joseph first, and then Jesus is.
Oh, I'm losing you again.
Yeah, I moved back.
Yeah, whenever somebody arises who kind of embodies that, it does follow that predictable path, doesn't it? They do get nailed up or shot down or, yeah, interesting.
Was it an accident that I was born on Christmas? I don't know. I'm gonna try not to get nailed to any trees anytime
Yeah,
soon.
yeah. No,
But,
there'll be a new version of it. Yeah. Mm. So, I mean, I feel like this is a whole other conversation to get into talking about the toys you talk about, or, or just some kind of daydreaming about what you imagine something like that pod achieving, or what you would like to see happen. Because I really feel like it's such a good habit for us to get into again, is to just verbalize and jam and discuss and, backwards and forwards visions for a wonderful world that we want to live in, and it can reference what's already here, like you have so beautifully with your, you would trade an ant, you wouldn't trade an ant for all the machines that have ever existed or all the technology. I mean, we can weave those together, but I really feel like just sharing these visions is a powerful thing to do, and a very creative, and it taps in to the unity. It's like we kind of sticking our fingers through waking reality into a bit of that and trying to pull it through. So
yes, I agree.
I'd like to do some of that with you, and maybe, as I'm saying this now, I'd like to do it with, two is a good number, but maybe it would be interesting to do it in a slightly bigger group,
I agree.
and see, and maybe just, it doesn't have to be this perfect thing, but we could just throw something together, pull in some people that might, you know, bring.
We can experiment. And honestly, if we were to try to train pods, we can learn from all of the different representations that mimic them, right? So in a sense, a lot of the work has been done. And what we would probably do is start out with small experiments, right? We would cut our teeth on relatively simple goals that we would brainstorm on together and find a way to manipulate the representational context from outside of it, right? Which is essentially what I think a good human pod would do, right? They would manipulate the constructs the humans. Look, our societies are resting, they're so hidebound, they're so highly structured, they're resting on single pivots that can be moved by single people at this point. with a wise enough group, a smart enough group, a passionate enough group, we could move the planet, man. I really believe we could. And
There
not only
is.
that, check this out. Here's the other part of the promise. If you do something that's so beautiful that it changes the meaning of the entire history of humanity and the sky itself comes to pay attention, that matters. The humans did something that meaningful when they detonated the first atomic bomb.
Mm.
That's the wrong kind of meaning. We got the attention of the sky, apparently, when we did that,
Mm.
right? There's a reason why that signal punched through to whatever it was that shut down the ICBMs at Malmstrom in the 60s. You know, there's a way to make the opposite of that kind of signal.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if you're doing something that's so beautiful that all of life on Earth would be thrilled that this was happening, you'll gain allies of a kind that we've never even imagined exist.
Well,
And right now, go ahead.
I was just,
Sorry, I'm.
no, it's fine. It's fine. Because just then things bubble up. And what bubbled up immediately was it would be good to kind of formally invite in or kind of speak to whatever may be out
We
there
agree about that.
to,
Yes, yes,
to
we
get
agree.
involved and help on the, put a bit of weight on the lever. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Yes, absolutely.
whatever's appropriate that is kind of beyond our vision, or I think, and also for us to have that kind of consciousness of inviting something bigger and a bigger perspective to get involved. I think that is an important bit for me.
I want to mention one feature of my own experience, which is that the contact space between humans and other intelligences is dangerous.
Sure, there's a
Not all the
caution.
intelligences are altruistic.
Sure, I get it. No, I knew
Yeah.
that was coming as I was
I
speaking.
mean, in my own
Yeah,
experience,
but this could, this is woven in with the intention and how it's presented, right? That maybe your experience can kind of guide appropriate ways to do that, or whoever else might be involved.
it'd probably be hard to do more damage than we're doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like I can think of really amazing things we could do that are dangerous, but I don't think they're more dangerous than what we're doing now. But the thing that I was trying to say was it's possible for us to do something so beautiful that it changes the meaning of history. We can actually change what history means by what we do today, which is, in a sense, a kind of time travel. You follow?
Yeah, or I think so. I mean, when you said that, I immediately thought, or kind of get out of history, or stop it so that something else that maybe follows history can start up. I don't know what that
Yeah,
is.
I was blown away when I first realized that acts in the now can change the meaning of the past. It's an obvious thing. It's so obvious that it seems trivial, but it's possible to do something so beautiful that the entire history of mankind would be transformed,
Okay, now I see
right?
what you
Because
mean.
it led to this,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it wouldn't justify the horrors of history, but it would transform their meaning dramatically.
Because
And that's a huge thing.
the latest moment can define everything that came before.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I get, I get it.
I
Interesting.
am so very grateful to you for asking me to speak with you and to share together, for me to hear your mind, and just for this context that we have together today. I'm really, really grateful. I'm not trying to wrap it up, but I just want to say that openly. It's such a privilege to have this time with you.
Likewise. No, I feel the same way. I do. I really do. And this is setting. I knew I wanted to start these conversations up again, and I'd started it before, and it was good, it was interesting, but it didn't quite, I hadn't quite found where it wanted to go. But this conversation has made me understand now what I'm trying to do here.
Oh, wow.
You know, no, but really, like it's such a creative act, a conversation, when you really show up and you know you're kind of. We were very, you know, inevitably, I guess, because you're super intellectual, but I know you're not exclusively.
No, I'm not.
We went that way, but you know, it's the whole kind of balance of heart, body, head I want to bring into these exchanges, but I think we have that anyway here. Um, but this is what I want to do, and I want to kind of create. You know, you've sort of defined it in more concrete terms. I want to create these moments that redefine the whole of human history previously to this now. With as
One of the
you know,
things that's astonishing about our conversation today is that it's doing what we're speaking about. This has changed the entire meaning of like my day, my week, the last seven, the last period. It's changed everything. To be able to have a conversation like this at all radically alters my own personal history of over the past, whatever span. And I'm humbled by that. There is an astonishing aspect of language where some forms of speaking about things enact what is being spoken of.
mm,
And this is a rare thing, or at least the form of it that I'm trying to point at is rare.
I know someone who's very good at that, who I'd like to maybe invite in to one of these collective
Boy,
groups.
that sounds exciting.
Someone who's a kind of real master of that, in fact. That yeah.
That would help me greatly.
Yeah.
I used to be far better at it than I am now. I'm sort of operating on a couple of cylinders, but
Well,
yes, that would
you
help
need
me
some
remember.
sleep, right?
It's not just that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I've been operating on a couple cylinders for a while, but that would be fabulous. I'm really curious to learn more about that person and speak with them.
Well,
And
I'll
I
send an
like the
invite.
idea of getting a few other people involved.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether we'll just do another jam on it and get deeper into it and share that, or not, or maybe we just immediately go to just getting a few people. Maybe if you've got someone in mind,
Or both.
or
We can
both.
have another jam and on a sideline consider the idea of potting up.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it. Well,
Mm.
I think this is a good place to stop because yeah, because it's you know we've completed something there which feels really good. Well, I'm so grateful too. I'm really, you know, I've in what we did for me was, and you described it when you said, you know, people go crazy for a rock band or whatever. It's that, and it reminds me of an experience when I was really young, when I had a band, and there were some moments when it all came together, and
Yes.
they were so beautiful and so powerful, and that was the purpose. It
Yes.
wasn't even about producing music that other people would hear. It was just about sharing that experience in that moment. And I feel
Mhm.
like tonight I've had an experience like that. And I've realized, God, I'm hungry for conversations like this. And I don't get
Yes,
enough
me
of
too.
them, you know? And I want
Yes,
more.
me
And I
too.
know there's loads of people out there who would, you know, make this even richer and more profound and, you know, and add massive areas of experience that I don't have, you don't have, you know,
Yes.
pull that in. So great. Wild.
Yeah, I mean, what's the equivalent of a rock band in mind space like, what's the insight equivalent of a rock band? You know?
Well, and I don't, for me, it's not, I don't consider myself a mind space person. I mean, I want to bring the body and, the soil in as well. I want to bring the hands
Mm.
that make in too. So,
Yes, yes, I agree deeply.
but yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're all the same thing. It is a rock band. It's a whatever. Yeah, it's a pod. It's a hand. It's a hand.
Yes, yes.
It's a hand. That's what it is. A hand of people. That's what we need. A hand of people. Okay. Wow. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to stop this recording, but hang on a second and we'll say goodbye.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
thank you so much for that.